In this tutorial, I'm going to introduce 3D layers into the workflow of After Effects. So I'm back and I'm going to start with a new composition. This time we don't need any film footage, we just do it on a plain black background. So we're going to start a new composition, and the composition I'm choosing is an HD, so it's the HD 1080p, so 1920 by 1080, 25 frames per second, and a default duration of 30 seconds. Okay, so sorry for that. The default is also you start with one view here. So right now we have the composition ready, and we have to put something into the composition so that we can work with it. And for right now it's enough to have a couple of text layers. So I'm going to start here with the text tool. I just click anywhere in my scene and I'm going to type text 01. The text 01, maybe yours is maybe a little bit smaller, so select the text, choose a large enough font size, so we just need 2 or 3 text elements, so I'm choosing 150 pixels text size. The font style doesn't matter. And now I'm going to take this text layer and I'm going to duplicate it 2 times. So I'm going to hit Ctrl D 2 times, and that will create 3 text layers right on top of each other. Now I select text layer number 2, and while I'm on the selection tool, I'm going to move it away to over here, and I'm going to select text number 3 and bring it up here. To make it easier, I'm also going to change their colors. So here's my text number 2. Let's change it to text number 2. Text number 2, and select all the elements. Click here on the fill color. I have one orange. I'm going to make one green, and the third one here. Double click it. This is text 03, and select it and choose a different color. Okay, so now I can address them by number 1, 2, 3 or by color. So up to now, what we did so far is a plain 3 elements in a 2D world. So whenever we move one thing on top of the other, what defined which text element is on top and which is on bottom? The layer order did that. So in the layer order, the top element, in this case 1 and 2, the top element hides the bottom element. So when those are on top, of course the number 2 is above number 1, so that's why it hides everything below. But the rest is just, so it's more or less a draw order, but it's not a real 3D space because it's all in the same 2D space. Also, when we moved something, we had only had X movement and Y movement, so we can move it around, but we cannot move it closer to the camera or to the viewer, to the audience, or further away. And all of this we can do as soon as we introduce a camera into the system. So the first step into using objects as 3D layers is I need a way to look at those layers, and that is by creating a camera. So in our modifier, in our composition layer set, I'm going for layer, new, and I'm going to create a new camera. The new camera that I'm creating, I'm going to use a 2-node camera. You'll see in a minute what's the difference. A 2-node camera. The 2-node camera basically is one that has a camera object and a target, a point of interest that it's looking to, so I can separately move those. A 1-node camera only has a camera. When I want to look to a different position, I have to rotate the camera. The next thing is I'm going for I'm going to start with a wide lens. So I'm going to choose a 20 millimeter lens. So a 20 millimeter lens. I'm not going to enable depth of field right now, so unclick, maybe yours is the default is unclicked, the enable depth of field. So that's it, a 20 millimeter lens, no depth of field on a 2-node camera. And I hit OK. So now we have a camera in our scene, And as soon as we have a camera, we can also introduce something new to the user interface, and that is we can switch the current view down here, and we can see that we have more options than active camera. We have camera 1, for example, and when I go to camera 1, now I'm in the camera 1 view. What is the camera 1 view? I think it's best explained when we look at the scene from the top. So I'm going to choose top. Now in top, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. The top view, don't look at the black frame here, because right now we are looking at a three-dimensional scene from the top. So here is the camera, and the camera is looking in with a 20mm lens, that's about, I don't know, 90 degrees, opening up here, and what we see here is the screen where everything happens. So our text 1, 2, and 3 elements, they are basically, here when you move your mouse, they are not visible. But once you turn those text elements into 3D layers, they are visible in the camera. So to turn a layer into a 3D layer, all you need to do is there's a little cube symbol here, and it says 3D layer. And when you select all the 3 text elements and turn them into 3D layers, here is what happens. Now if I select one of my 3D layers, you can see that the text is right here, like on the screen of our cinema projection. If this is the projector, here is everything happening in the same plane. We're still looking from the top. And here's text number 2, and here's text number 3. So now if I want to see my actual camera view, all I need to do is switch into camera view. This view is exactly the same as the one we had before, but just by turning them into 3D layers, they appear in the camera just like they have been before. But the difference is now we can take those text elements, and if I look, for example, at text number 1, and I'm going to open the transform, you can see that now every position, scale, and so on, we got some more, now has 3 coordinates. For example, position now has X and Y position, and also C position. And a C position of 0 means it is in this plane that we saw when we looked at the scene from the top. Also, rotations are now not only possible in X and Y, but also in C. And I'll show you what that is. So if I look at X rotation, for example, and I play with it a little bit, you can see that it now rotates around the X-axis, around the Y-axis, or around the C-axis. You can rotate it in the 3 dimensions. Let me reset that. Oops, reset was also the position reset. Didn't plan to do that. So the next thing is the position itself. The position of all the 3 text elements are now all in 0. Let me take text number 1 and change its position to a negative value, which means it brings it closer to the camera. So I'm going to bring it to negative something. Let me move it up a little bit so that it's still in the view, but now it's minus 370 or so. And I'm going to keep text number 2 in the same distance, and I'm going to select text number 3 and also change the, let me close that, text number 3, P for position, and I'm gonna, for a positive distance, also about the same, around 400-500 pixels. Okay, so now the text that is further away obviously got smaller, the one that is closer is larger. Let's look at the same scene again from the top. So I'm gonna switch camera 1 to a top view, and now you should see, here's the camera, and here are my text elements. The text element from being in this plane came closer. The text number 2 is still in the same plane. Here it is. And this is the other text number 3. So what I had before is now something that we can use quite well. When we take, here it says 1 view, and we switch to 2 views horizontal, then we get 2 different views here. And I'm going for a, on the left side, top view, and I click into the right window, and I'm going to set the right window to camera 1. So here is what the camera sees right now, and here it is how it's located in space. So when I now select my text number 1, and you can see there's a little blue axis. If I take it on the blue axis, you can see it actually moves in 3D space, and it gets larger and smaller as it moves. Or text number 3, also when I select it here and I move it closer, it gets larger when it gets closer to the camera or further away. Okay, so, and the really important effects you get as soon as you do something to the camera. Let's have a look at the camera. Right now I'm just selecting the camera here in top view. Also the camera has positions, and one thing is, for example, when you take in the top view your camera and move it forward and backward, you can see that you're actually moving in space and you're passing text number 1, you're flying by text number 2, and you're underneath text number 3. So that is a real 3D space, 3D text that we're creating. Of course, you can also move it sideways, and you can see those texts in 3D space, they move according to that. Or of course you can also move up and down, but I cannot do that in my top view. Okay, so now we know how to create the camera, how we use text and turn it into a 3D layer, and how we move around those 3D layers a little bit. Let's have a look at the camera one more time. Here's the camera, and I turned it into a 2-node camera, so it means when I open transform, I can see that it has, as we saw, rotation, so I can rotate my camera X, Y, and Z direction, same as I or rotate it this way. Let me reset that back to 0, 0, 0. I can also move it closer. I can use the rotation angle also to rotate the camera locally, the whole thing in one, X, Y, Z. And let me reset that again. Position, of course, closer, further away, and so on. And we also have the point of interest. And the point of interest is this point where the former plane was, where everything was located. If I move my point of interest, for example, the Y or the X value, you can see now the camera pans sideways. So it pans from left to right, or reset, if I use the Y value, it tilts up and down. Okay, so like with a real 3D space. So let's see how reset. What if I bring in a new layer into our scene? The new layer, I'm going for a simple picture. Here is a simple picture that I just had lying around somewhere here. And I'm going to take the picture and pull it in my timeline. And it automatically fits into the timeline. So here's our picture. You notice when I move the camera, so it doesn't matter what I do. For example, I select my camera and I move forward and backward. You see that only the text element react to the camera, not the picture. Why? Because the picture that I just added is not a 3D layer. So it's not reacting to any of the camera movement. If I want it to react, I have to make it a 3D layer. Now it appears here in my plane. So when I select my picture, it's still a little bit larger. So it's there's some parts out of it. And now when I select my camera and move it forward or backward, you can see that the picture also reacts to the camera. Okay, only 3D objects do. When I unclick it again, it's a plain background as it is. The next thing is I'm introducing another type of objects that works in 3D space quite well, and that is a light. You ask me, why do we use lights? We don't have the text elements. Yeah, they're everything is well lit. Let's try it. Layer, new, light. And I'm going to use a point light. A point light with white color, intensity, we can always do that. And right now, no cast shadows. Okay, so now you see, let me turn off the picture for a moment. You can see that now here is the position of the light. In the top view, in the front, in the camera view, you can see it's about on eye level, or it's in the middle, approximately in the middle of the picture. Okay, it sends out light, and suddenly the text has different lighting. It's brighter here and it's darker there. So when I now move the light, you can notice that the lighting of my object changes. Of course, according to the angle and the distance to the light, it has different colors. But if my background picture is turned on, and it's not a 3D layer right now, it's just a plain background. You notice when I move the light, only the text element reacts to the light, not the background picture. Because my background picture is not a 3D layer. Lights are only influencing 3D layers. So let's turn our picture into a 3D layer. And suddenly, what else did you notice? The text that is behind the picture, of course, is not visible because it is behind the picture plane. But now if I move the light, you can see the light also influences the background picture. It's a little too dark. And let me get it down a bit. Can I change the light settings, the point light settings, by double clicking the name of the light, and that will open up the same light settings. Let's make it a little bit stronger. Intensity, let's do 150. And fall off means it's not going to change its intensity over distance. Here's different settings for that, because it doesn't matter how far it is away, only the angle is important. And let's try cast shadows. Something. So here is cast shadows. I'm going to take my picture here. So, and now it's much brighter. You can see when it is in front of the picture, it almost creates a highlight there. You will notice when you move the light that the two elements that should actually cast a shadow on the picture, which is those two text elements, they should have a shadow on the background. They don't cast a shadow. The reason is that it's not enough to select the light and hit cast shadows, turn it on. By the way, 150 is maybe a little bit too intense. I'm going to bring it back to 100. But I have the cast shadow turned on, but also the element that should cast a shadow, for example, text number 2, has to have the material option. And when you open up the text element, you can see material option. And one of the material options is cast shadows. So you need to have cast shadows turned on. I'm going to do the same for text number 1. So here is material options and cast shadow on. Then when you now move the light, you can see that the light passes by but also casts a shadow onto the picture in the background. Okay, so all those things that have to do with lights and cameras only work when the layer is turned into a 3D layer. Let me show you one more thing, and that is depth of field. So that means depth of field, that only a certain distance from the camera is sharp, and everything beyond it or in front of it is out of focus, so that there's one focus plane and then that everything else is slightly blurry. Therefore, I'm going to start I'm simplifying my scene a little bit. I'm going to select my point light and hit delete. When there's no light in the scene, you always have some kind of default lighting. I'm also deleting my camera, and I'm going to delete my picture in the background. So I'm starting again with only those 3 text elements. And now I'm going to create a new camera. Layer, new camera. Because this time, and all of you are into photography, when you use a 20mm lens, there's almost no chance to get depth of field. That has to do with the lens, and has to do with the aperture size and the f-stop. Basically, what do you need when you want to have a strong depth of field, a very shallow depth of field, so a strong blur? You need to have a telelens, you need to be close to your object, and you need to have a small aperture, a small f-stop. So what I'm going to use is, I'm going to use, let's try a 135mm lens. That means when we look from the top, the camera will be much further away. So 135mm lens, again, I'm going to use a 2-node camera. And this time I'm going to hit Enable, Depth of Field. And right now just hit OK. So here is I'm going to select the left view as my top view and the right view as my camera 1. So in my camera 1, so if I look from the top, you can see now with a 135mm camera, it's a tele lens. I'm much further away now looking at the scene. Let's see some of the settings of our camera. Why don't I see my text elements? They should be visible because they are 3D layers. Let's look at the camera and some of the camera options. So right now we have, the problem is we don't see it because they are so blurry that we don't see them at all. For our camera, we can define where is the sharp distance, and right now we are really far away. If you look at camera position, we are position -7,000. So we are 7,000 pixels away from our ideal plane here in the middle. So it only makes sense when the sharp distance is also somewhere around 7,000. Or we have to get our camera closer. We can move it closer. But let's try this. So here it says the depth of field is on. We turned it on. And the next thing is the focus distance is 300 pixels. So it's sharp only here, but we need a focal distance of, let's try 7,000. So now we are in focus, and the problem is when you are having a telelens and you are taking a picture of something that is, let's say, 7,000 meters away, and I'm looking here, the ideal distance in the middle is 7,000, then maybe 7 kilometers away, then this one is just 6.8, and this maybe 7.2. So basically we talk about objects that are really close together because of the far distance. So the blurriness only works really well when we are closer to the camera. That means if the focal distance is 7,000, we're not going to get any blur effect, even if we set the settings high. Let's try a focal distance of 1,000. There we see, now it's getting blurry. If we now take our camera and move it closer, taking the position and move it closer, then you can see that, of course, we kind of zoom in, but we're also getting some time. Oh, of course we zoom in. That is not good. Let's try to open up the zoom a bit. So different, not so much and so strong. So now it's better. So I'm closer to the point. So I'm going to change the focal length a little bit. And now I can set my sharp distance, which is this white line here. I set it to somewhere in the middle of my scene. Open the camera, double click the camera. You can see that the f-stop of the camera right now is 3. To get the strongest possible blur, we have to go for something really small. Let's go for an f-stop of 1, or even take the blur level up a bit. So I increased the blur level. So I made a small f-stop. 1 is, you hardly ever find a lens with an f-stop of 1, and I just increased the blurriness by 4. So right now we have the sharp. If I look here, this is the white line, is the sharp distance, the areas in it, and the text, of course, that is further away is blurry, and the one that is closer is also blurry. Now if I take my camera and move it forward and backward, you can see that the blurriness now is, the sharpness is now at text 1, it moves to text 2, and it moves now to text 3. So you can either change or move the camera actually closer, and that shifts the blur a little bit, or you can also animate the camera's focus distance. If I change the focus distance, you can also see that the blur moves from one to the other. So what usually a camera assistant does, the focus pulling, you can also do that by changing the focus distance here. Okay, so that was a brief introduction to 3D layers. Let me do one more thing, and that is, let me quickly create an effect that you often see, and that is I'm going to place a solid layer. So layer, new solid of any color that we don't have here. We don't have anything reddish, light red. So, and the solid, the size of the solid, usually I would make it comp size, but in this case, comp size is of course the size that the composition is, but when I move it further, the comp size only works when it's right here. But when I move it further away, I have to make it larger in order to cover the whole thing. So let's go for 4000 by 4000. And now I'm having a pink plane. The pink plane, of course, I'm going to put it all the way on the bottom layer, and also I'm going to turn it a 3D layer. So now it is here at 0, and I'm going to select my medium solid, change the P, its position, and bring it further away from the camera so that I see all 3 of my text elements. Now, what did I want it to do? I wanted to add an effect again with a light. And if you place a layer new light, you can also use spotlights or something like this. I'm going to use another point light here, again without shadows, and I'm going to place it in the center of my scene. And I think you have seen that in all kinds of situations. It now lights up the background, but with a slight vignette effect. So it's in the brightest in the middle, where the angle towards the light is almost 0. And when it goes over here, it's getting slightly darker. So even if I take my camera now, for example, and I move it closer or further away, the background will always stay in this pink color, and it will always have this slight gradient on it. By the way, that is something that you can also use when you use a plain 2D animation. Just to have a nice background, create a large solid and a light. Only make the solid 3D, not everything else that you animate in the front. That can stay 2D, then the light is only influencing the solid there. Okay, so I think that was a couple of things about cameras and a couple of things about lights and how they work with 3D layers. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.